These traditional houses inside the Balkans and Turkey developed during the Ottoman rules. So since I'm coming basically from Bosnia and Herzegovina as a representative of Fatih Sultan Mehmed Vakıf University, I will give some examples mostly focused on the area where I'm from, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I have to say it is an advantage to be from Bosnia due to experience, like historical experience that we have to face Ottoman culture and Ottoman development of Ottoman architecture inside Bosnia, and later on we were under Austro-Hungarian Empire, so it is advantage to see both side of the urban development and also kind of reshaping up to current moment. So let's see first, before I start to give more details about the basically structuring of the traditional houses, I would like just to give small introduction or let's say overview of some historical facts. First, here we can see the Ottoman Empire, and basically according to the large scale of the area that we can see that was included in the Ottoman Empire, of course the border were changed during the centuries according to their conquesting the territory, but we see also according to this large scale, basically it was multicultural, multi-ethnical empire. So here also you can see the area of the Balkan region. So why it is so important to mention and to emphasize? It is the presence of the Ottoman culture, of the Ottoman Empire inside the already Europe soil. Basically, it was the door toward Europe. But how they started their advancing toward Europe, it was basically starting with the 14th century, taking also Edirne. And this city, today it belongs to Turkey, and it was the second capital of the Ottoman Empire after Bursa and before Istanbul. Which you all know, basically, it is like the most famous later on. But it is important to mention also the Edirne due to the fact it was the door toward Europe. So here we can see a couple of maps and basically according to the years and centuries how the borders were changed. But again, for us, for this topic, it is important first to understand what occurs with the arrival of, arrival of the Ottomans. And if I mark here the border, this is like that area. So today we know Balkans as a region of the several states such as Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, Albania, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, I don't know, not to forget some of the countries. But basically, when Ottoman arrived here, as I said, starting from the 14th century, it was already developed civilization. It was already under different influence of the, for instance, Byzantium and so on. So basically, what happens, it is the changes of, not just of the new ruling system. Here we have to mention that for the first time, basically, the new religion occurred, it is the religion of the Islam. And why it is important to mention? It was not just like a new religion, monotheistic religion, and so on, and not just about that basically people were just accepting the new religion. It was about the new way of life, new style life, and it was deeply basically reflected also in the creating the housing structure, basically in the creating the new architectural buildings. So we will see basically through the examples what has happened. But also it has its specialties because this border, if we put it like that, we can consider this in one way it is the buffer, and from other way it is the meeting point. So like why meeting point? It is the meeting point, for instance, from the Christianity, like Orthodox and Catholicism, but from the other side it is also the buffer from the Western influence toward the Islamic world, let's say. So in that way, basically this area, this region has some local influence for the future development of the cities. But as I said, here civilization and culture was already existing, and now with the Ottoman arrival, basically cities were reshaped, or let's say adopted to the new culture that is related to the Islam religion, because new type of building occurred, and one of the type of buildings is of course new religious building, which was the mosque. And the mosque was always the core of the cities. It was always like emphasized by the mosque in order to provide the proper places for the new religion, to practice religion. Then some of the basic characteristics of the Ottoman settlements here we can see, for instance, it was also in the first photo, you can see the fortress in order to provide security. So basically, cities could be just reshaped or adopted, or sometimes, but it was like rarely that new cities were developed, fully new cities. And also, some cities that were already existing and maybe they were so important centers, they continue to be again important, or for instance, if they were on some crucial points or they were on crossroad of very important route, for instance, traditional roads and so on, trade roads, sorry. So they again continue to be the important places, or for instance, they were very important naval bases, important port, and so on. Another element was the presence of the water, because water is one of the very important important element of the Islamic culture. And then you can see here on two photos at the end, it is one photo representing the core of the traditional settlement, and another one is basically the residential area. But we will see what does it mean, basically, when we go more into detail and how it was developed. Also from the history, we don't need to bother ourselves so much about the development and how the Ottomans were conquering so big territory up to Vienna, as we know from the history. But of course, we can mention, for instance, some of the famous sultan, which was Sultan Fatih, the conqueror, who took the Istanbul. And Istanbul will be basically captured in 1543. And 10 years later, basically, the border was inside the Bosnia and Herzegovina. So as you see, it was really fully enlarged. And to come back to this topic of the urban fabric, definitely there was several external and internal factors. And now to go more into detail. When we are talking about reshaping the cities, we have to mention also interreligious coexistence. And one of the very good examples, maybe best example, was the Sarajevo. Because even today, from this period, you can find in the core of the cities different religious buildings existing side by side. And it was also confirmed with the charter issued by the Sultan. So today we are happy, basically, to have existence of this and preserve this monument inside the core of the city. So what I want to emphasize here is that core was basically the center of the governmental offices, of the market core, or with the religious building. It was traditionally called charshi. I don't know whether you are familiar with these names. And the core of the city was surrounded with the mahallas. Mahallas is the residential areas. So it depends basically how huge or large city was. It could have several mahallas, and basically if it was large scale of the town, it's called sheher or kasaba if it was smaller. But as you can see, it was always kind of difference between core, what is public, and something which is traditional residential area, and we call it mahalla. So it was always divided. And this is some basically principle that was later on also implied and used for, if we go more into detail, if we now go, and we will go to the detail of mahalla, and even if we go into the detail of the housing structure, we will always see this basically division between public and private. And it is basically related to what I mentioned, the basically impact of the Islam as a new religion. It has its basically reflection in the way of the city shaping. So here you can see a couple of the just urban fabric of the traditional urban areas, and if we see the core of the city, as I said, for the first time we have occurred some of the buildings, the type of buildings. It is mosque, as you can see here, two examples. One is more monumental. It depends, of course, who the founder was. Then you can see the public bath called hammam, then clock towers, bezistan, han, tombs, medresa, which was type of school, as you can see on this slide. So these old buildings are basically, they were built inside the core of the cities. And so if we see what was happening already in Anatolia, this was applied basically now also in the Balkan region. There was no prepared plan for the city development, for the urban development. It was just the way of shaping the city that was already broadly accepted and broadly applied inside Anatolia. And now Balkan cities were just adopted to this, or as I said, in the very few examples, we have totally new structure. So mosque was the center of the urban core. Here is one of the examples in Bosnia and Herzegovina, city of Maglaj. And you see it was also under the fortresses. Due to something what was existing before, for instance, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it was a period of the Bosnian kingdom. So we had already traces in most of the cities, it was fortresses, and under that you have developed the core of the city. And core was surrounded, as I said, with mahallas. So all these very simple cubic forms around the core is basically a residential area. So here is another example, and you can see from one of the fortresses in another example, which is city of Teshan, how it looks basically the view of one. Of course, today most of the houses are reshaped and they change the basic idea of what is it, but usually just fabric in a way of to have very simple cubic forms. That is what has left of it in many examples. Then here you can see basically one very simple sketch of the typical mahalla. Besides to have also these houses, very important was to have integrated the natural surrounding into this built area of the mahallas. Also, inside mahalla you have one neighborhood mosque, smaller of course, then it should be also bakery, school, and also you can see the difference between a main street and some blind street that were leading just to the houses. And also, usually public faucet, it was important to have inside this residential area. So urban fabric was very organic. And what we saw from these examples, basically we can compare it in what we have in Anatolia. This is one of the examples. This is mahalla from Antalya. And again, we can see very simple cubic forms and very irregular street pattern, and also it is very organic form. So, as I said, the same model was applied. If we want to show it in a very simple way, this should be basically the map of one residential area. And the center represents the mosque of the traditional housing area, and surrounding with this small cubic, very simple housing structure. And then, as I said, we can always find the same principle, which is basically division to private and public area. So what we have, what I showed on one of the previous slides, as you could see, the core was the public core, and it was surrounded by the mahalla. So here, again, in the difference, here we can find private, public. Always this relationship was basically repeated. So this is the private and this is the public. So if we observe the mahallas, then you have like a street and have a mosque as a core, which was representing the public part of the mahallas, and surrounded with the walled, usually housing structure. And also, if you observe just the model of the house, what we will see, basically, again, we have division of the public and private spaces. For the creation of mahallas, and why they are today very considered as very valuable assets, basically, it is also to understand how they were created or settled inside some site. For instance, it was adaptation to the morphology of the terrain. So the people were respecting the contour line in order to provide for each house. So this was the principle basically applied, to provide for each house enough sunlight and vistas. you don't have this relationship which we are facing today, like I don't care for my neighbors, I will just build what I can have for myself. So here it was very important to think about surrounding and also to have integration of the natural surrounding inside the compound of the housing area. And then cult of the neighborhood, that was something also very valuable. So in each mahalla, you could find the rich people or rich population and less rich or poor people. So they were always under patronage of the richer. So this social factor was very important, and it is one of the values of the traditional neighborhood. And then why these mahallas looks, if we can find preserved examples, like they are very sympathetic and people like to walk and to spend some time here. It is usually because of this narrow street, but it is not just about the street, it is about this basically nice part of the houses that you can basically find them in each examples if you go in Anatolia, if you go inside the region of the Balkan. So here are some examples from Anatolia, for instance from Bursa and Jumal Kazık here, you see, and we call it just differently, basically. They call it Jumba or Koshku or inside the Turkey, and we call it Dogsat in Bosnia. But here is, for instance, example from the Berat, and this is the World Heritage Site also. So again, the same principle. We can see basically this projection to the street, the narrow street, and so on. And then this is the view of the traditional urban fabric. As I said, it's very organic, and these are examples from the Anatolia. You can find it in Kütahya, in Safranbolu, and some of the examples are also inscribed and recognized as a World Heritage. Again, Berat, in order to show this integration of, as you can see, so many natural surroundings integrated inside this built structure, and this city was basically built, or it was developed along the river as one of the important elements. As you can see on this map, it has recognized inside protected area 3 parts. It is castle and 2 mahallas. So this is the view from the castle. Mostly these structures are from the 16th century. This city had luck because it was not under program of some strong redevelopment, and it was not faced with the reshaping of the city. So today they have really a lot of preserved structure, and it is, as I mentioned before, World Heritage Site. And then this is an example from Ohrid. And for some of these cities, you can see always what is basically different. Sometimes you have just impact of some local tradition or local usage of material, usually, or for instance of shaping some part or detail of the houses. But structures basically were using the same principle of constructing the house. And then you have from Bulgaria houses. Again, you see the same principle of this projection on the houses, and just later on, after 18th century, they got this colorful facade, but so many structures are preserved today also inside the Plovdiv. Then example from Kavala, for instance, in Greece. Again, you can find this principle that I just explained. So more or less, this is 400,000 units of this regional character was built, and of course as combination of autochthonic Islamic elements, but unfortunately not much has left. But what has happening basically inside the Ottoman area, inside the area that was under the Ottoman rules, better to say, basically it started with the 18th century, when the Ottoman Empire was faced with the influence and of the Western civilization and culture, and there was some trial to modernize the empire. And it started with the Tanzimat Charter, when they basically divided the religious and public administration law. So when it started, later on we have also outcome that was facing with transformation, destruction, modernization. So basically with the 19th century, as I put here, the agricultural society was dethroned. And what happened with the core that were basically traditionally developed, and they have this simple division between public and the private spaces, basically they were now facing total changes, totally facing with the structure of some new architecture that is not belonging to that traditional settings, or maybe sometimes the new part of the city was built just in the vicinity but without respecting what was already existing. So basically, the 19th century, there was this newly established national state, and basically in order to show the identity of this country, usually Ottoman heritage, when I'm saying about this Balkan region, they were faced with destroying so many traces of the Ottomans. So idea was, in order to confirm identity, to destroy what was basically developed during the Ottoman rules. And unfortunately, one of the examples is to destroy traditional structures. But for instance, Bosnia and Herzegovina was a bit different because we were under Austro-Hungarian occupation, so it was basically idea to use pseudo-Islamic or pseudo-Mauryan style. So we didn't face what other Balkan region or Balkan countries were facing. And according, for instance, the Iverdi, you can find basically how many mosques or educational or other public buildings were constructed inside the Balkan region. There was basically very deep research done, and here we can just follow a couple of the examples following these maps to see how structure was changing. What we can basically conclude here that there is no more this organic form and very simple form that was created during the Ottoman rule. Basically, the cities were now with larger blocks, the streets were also enlarged and so on. So sometimes they were really reshaping the core of the cities, and sometimes by creating in the vicinity, they were totally, they had destructive influence. So Ottoman monuments today, they are faced with sometimes bilaterally or sometimes converting, so they are facing with the loss of their values due to different, of course, reason. But unfortunately, I have to mention this example from Bosnia, that even in the 20th century we were facing the loss of valuable assets during the genocide that was in Bosnia 1992 to 1995, and unfortunately so many monuments, and not to speak of course about the traditional housing area, where this is the most famous example of the destruction of the old bridge in Mostar, which is today. But it's not just about the old bridge, like everybody was talking about the old bridge. If you see the map after the war of the Mostar, you can see how many traditional houses like that were also awarded with Aga Khan award for the architecture before the war as the best preserved traditional core with also traditional houses. But unfortunately this was happening, but today most of these houses are restored, and also sometimes they of course change the function. They are used as hotels or some artistic colonies and so on. So now to go a bit back and to focus on the structure of the housing complex. So this is one of the basic sketch, and we will see what is basically the main elements of one housing compound. Maybe here you can already notice it is about to have avlia, which is the courtyard, so we call it avlia. Then you have a housing structure and you have garden. So these are three basic elements, and they were always included in creating the housing complex. Oriental house was like oriented toward the inner, so it was basically as a result of the Islamic influence. And this is one of the compounds. So you see 4 number is the house per se, then you have courtyard, garden. As I said, this is the most important part. So the housing compound was always surrounded with the wall. And basically the access to this complex could be, it is always from the street, but it could be of course differently positioned according to how the complex was developed. And when we speak just about the structure of the house, here you can see, starting from the most simple part toward the most complicated, let's say complicated, with the central hall, and then you can see the units of the rooms were surrounding this hall. So it is always about the hall and these units which were the rooms. This is like one of the segments of the house, and then with repetition of these segments, you are getting bigger or smaller house. It depends, of course, how rich family was. But it always had the room, which was like a room that could be used during the day and the night, and we will see basically why. Then you have some kind of winter room. You can follow the numbers, basically. As you can see, one is this part. If I have this laser, do I have? No? At the end I said, no. Number one is the room you can follow. Then you see winter room, then you have a sofa. So just like differences between what you have in Anatolia or what you have in Balkan region, it is about how we call it. But in English, when you translate, you come to the same point. And then you have this always part that is oriented towards the garden. And how a courtyard is looking like, this is one of the examples. But I will speak now in the next slide about this. As you can see, the structures were very simple, and then there is always this combination of the cubic form and this wooden part, which is open area, hayat, or upper floor we call divanhana. And then, as I said, very important element, it is to integrate greenery always. So this is the view from the street. And then again we can recognize this docksat or this projection toward the street. And this was example from Sarajevo, this is example from Anatolia. Then example of the hayat to see how it looks like. So this is that open area from which you are just entering the rooms. As you can see, this construction so this space was a space to gather family and so on. It was with wooden construction. You can see that always these wooden columns had the base, which was stone base, and this is very simple construction, and it was supporting the construction of the roof. So it was like this part was under one roof. And when we zoom into the room, here we can see basically the origin is coming from the interior of the tent. So these rooms were used during the day and during the night. And then when family was enlarged, basically each room could be used by one family, like father, and then after son is married, he can use another room. I can use this. So this is the tent, and then reshaped tent. As a reshaped tent, we have resulted in the shape of the houses. But when we think about this interior, you can see this is the central area, and then around these three walls you have seating, we call it sedia, like sofa. You have always sofa, so they can use it during the night and during the day. And this important element we call musandera. This is basically the cupboard, and here is integrated also the washing part. Then to leave any kind of, whatever you have, you can leave here, and it was basically integrated in the wall, and also the entrance to the room was part of this element of the musandera. And what is very important is basically the design of this was very nicely decorated as a wooden work, and you will see some of the example. And if you try to analyze how many examples of this spatial organization have, you can see like its variety. So these common elements basically are the same as I said for Anatolia. So this is some part of the Anatolian house, which is very symmetrical, and then you have this common space, and you are entering the rooms from the common space that was used for the gathering of the family. And then in the complex you see it is house per se, these are some auxiliary buildings, and this is like a courtyard with the green area of the bache. So and then if you zoom into this part so it could have L shape, it could have just E shape, U shape, so it's different shape, but the purpose is same. So it was used for gathering family, for talking, sitting, whatever, and then you are entering into the units of the rooms. And as you can see, this is called Marjarevi Kütahya, in Kütahya inside the Turkey. And this is basically of that house, just drawing plans, and here you can see on this section, you can see the wooden structure basically that was used and some of the examples. Now we just passed through this example from Anatolia, and if we want to compare it with Balkan, we can find definitely the common, like the same essence is here. Again, here you can see it's written, it's Plovdiv house, is from Macedonia, Tetovo, then you have Kosovo. So always, just like it can vary in shape of this common central area, and it was used for the entering the rooms. This is also facade where you can notice again the same element, and another example from Kosovo. Again, even here you can see this part of the docksat that was like part of the facade as projection from the room, and also in Bosnia and Herzegovina some of these examples from Herzegovina, Gavran Kapetanovića. And now what I was mentioning, this interior part, which was very richly decorated as a wooden work, you can see it is musandara. So it can also include this kind of elements, and as you see, the entrance door was always part of the musandara. Here maybe it's better visible. So also according to how rich family was and so on, this decoration could be, of course, like richer or poorer, it depends. And some of the interior elements, and sometimes for the decoration, this is also something from the tradition, like these motifs were used for the decoration of the interior. And in some cases, this is from Anatolia, you can find, of course, the presence of the water element. And what is also important to mention, this ceiling that was also richly decorated with the wood. So the same principle, just motifs were different in Anatolia and in Balkan region. But basically the same. This is the sofa, as we saw on the previously. It was following 3 walls sofa, and from here you can observe the street because it has direct projection to the street. And sometimes you can find also some a bit different examples, but this is mostly when you have some also like richly developed some other type of architecture, but it is mostly expressed in a way of using some local material, or maybe some craftsmen were very well skilled, and they were coming from the neighboring countries and so on. So one of the examples is Počitelj in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where you have direct impact of the Dubrovnik, and you have Mardin in Turkey because it is down on the border with Syria. So you can basically see the impact of the surrounding, but as I said, usually it might be also expressed in the way of using some decoration, for instance here stone decoration for the facade and so on. So basically when you compare, as I said, mostly it is even in usage of material, in shape, and everything is definitely able to be compared, and basically we can conclude it is same in the region. But some differences are usually occur due to, for instance, belonging to different climatic region or geographical region, let's say. Good example is Bosnia, because here you have Bosnia is basically more continental area and Herzegovina is more Mediterranean. And more or less like it is about difference in the usage of material. Bosnia is rich with the wood, so the roof covering could be found, especially if you are trying to find examples from villages. It is usually was used wood, and in Herzegovina it was stone. And you can see this traditional way of using stone for the roof covering. Now we will see some of the examples of in different parts, but of course we can see what is the common for. For instance, this is city of Jajce, Again, but due to the fact it is it has the climate with the more snow comparing to Herzegovina and so on, we can see the shape of roof. It is more like pitched, and the slope of the roof is this, a bit sloppy. Then you can see this, basically, this way of creating the houses. It was always about the ground floor and about the first floor. This is basically, or they could be only the ground floor level. Houses have always the ground floor, which is like a heavy ground floor because of also the usage of the materials. Openings were smaller, and mostly it was used for storages and so on, but for as a living space, as rooms, usually it was on the upper floor. And then another example is from Gradačac. In this city, even though it was one of important city during the Ottoman rules, this is a house of Kapetan Gradačević, captain, one of the important figure from the history. But as you can see, the richer people could have bigger house. This is the difference. But unfortunately, this is sometimes situation which you can find when I'm trying to explore something about traditional architecture. But what is good that you can see this kind of elements, that you can see basically that these wooden beams were used to reinforce the stone structure. This is important. If nothing, you can learn something from this ruin. Then something from the central area, Eminagća konak in Tešanj. Again, here in these photos, it's nicely to see these interior elements, sofa, then a ceiling which was richly decorated. And what is also important here, basically to mention that all these traditional houses, always the shape of the ground floor and the upper floor is basically just repetition. It is the same. Just the usage of the space, as I said, was different. And then usually for the ground floor, or here they have also the basement, it was done by the stone, quarry stone, and upper floor was with adobe and also with wooden beams in order to reinforce it. And then from Maglaj, here you can see some more simple structure. These photos were taken around 60s, and this is 2012. This is this simple structure, but you can recognize what we were mentioning, this common space and the entrance to the room, even though these are some of the smaller, because these cities are small and they were basically influenced by the village architecture. Then you have another example from Maglaj Uzerbegovića konak, again same principle, and then one village to show from the central Bosnia. This was very important area during the Ottoman rules, but later on they lost their function. Unfortunately, this is how it looks like. You can see even green house today, but some of them inside this is what it was looking like with traditional elements. And one of the houses converted now and used as the local museum. But some of the old, this is a drawing of the old drawings. So here you can see again what is the structure, you have these wooden beams used for the reinforcing, and also they were using racks here, in order not to have this part of the wall, they were just using racks and cut it, and then they were constructing the houses. And now to go to the central part of Bosnia, this is city of Sarajevo. So here we can find some example of the richer house and this division into and we call it, as I said, public and private. So when you have house, it is selamuk and haremuk. So selamuk was usually used by male and haremuk usually by the woman. But why this? Again, we are coming to the same story from the beginning, this influence of the Islam to make this division. But it was due to the fact that basically it was also feudal society and so on. So many people were coming here maybe to negotiate, to have some trade and so on. So that's why it was kind of a publicly used area, and it was basically for the males. But here it was female part because also kids were here. It was like family, more private zone. And then the upper floor, but what is important here, just if you can figure out and recognize these elements that I was mentioning, like the central area used for the entering the room, and also in the male part. And the most famous example is Svrzo's house from Sarajevo. These are some of the drawings of the compound. What is important here, it is because this is like richer house, and then you can find this division between, we will follow these two, ground floor and the first floor. This is a male part or selamluk and haremluk. It is strictly divided here, and in each part you can find the courtyard or the avluya, as we said. And this is basically just to see the entrance from the street, and this house was surrounded by the avluya wall. Then here, just to go to focus in some of these parts, they have just ground floor. We will see here, for instance, this is when you enter, so you are entering directly to male avluya, to this part of the selamluk. Then this part was used just as a storage area, and you have this bachelor house, and it was used for the guests. Then you are entering to this more private zone, first in avluya, then you are entering this part of the old females and for the younger females. So you see hayat directly from the avluya, and then you can enter the room for the females. And that part was only, as you can see here on the second floor, which part are basically two floor. And as you can see, this is the avluya wall, this is the projection of the street from the male room, and each of these rooms, they were, as I said before, multifunctional room to be used during the day and during the night. And then here, just a drawing to show the section and some of the views. This is it. So, as I said, for the construction, it is important to know that just it was repetition of the same outline, but when we observed the construction, it was the stone on the ground floor, and it was just adobe with the wooden beams for the upper floor. Very simple construction. And then you have this avluya wall. It is around 4 meters height. You have the gate. It was always wooden gate. It has also a roof. And also they were plastered and usually in white color. Here is each of these elements, how it looks like basically on the photograph. What is important also to mention here, that usually it was around 1 meter, along with the wall, left for the greenery, to have flowers and so on for the inner part. And this is this wall, avluya wall. As you can see, it is white colored, and the roof of the entrance of the gate, and wooden element of divankhana. As I said before in one example, it has this stone base, it is wooden construction, and also this part, these pillows, they can also be nicely decorated. And usually it is like that. And this is other part. Here you can see some other section, again showing this type of the construction. And the view, this is the female courtyard. And as you can see, also the stairs were wooden, leading to this upper open area. And here is the drawing of the musandera. In order to understand, we were showing this musandera, what does it mean. So it is like everything integrated into this cupboard, even the washing part, washing tube. And some of the sequence from this house from the interior, and richly decorated ceiling. And of course, to mention again, to memorize that it is along 3 walls, this secha or sofa. And then we go to Herzegovina. Basically, we will see it is more or less the same concept, but what is different, that they were fully using the stone for the housing structure, because they have stone, and in Bosnia it is more rich with the wood. So this is one of the complex along the, if somebody was in, but I recommend, if you are dealing with also traditional houses, I recommend also Blaga and Mostar. It's a very nice area to be visited. So this is the plan of these houses. Again, you can see like this division into this part. So just it depends like how rich the family was. But of course you have again this open part, and you can see, and these are a bit higher buildings. Then you have this building, Musbegovića House, which is today used as a boutique hotel, and even they got prize for the best in, I don't know, 2013-14. So they have this division with the house, with this courtyard, and also of course now this is a drawing of after the restoration work and adaptation to some new users. So sometimes you have some changes in this, but basically the form is same as it was originally. And you can see some that sometimes even houses, they have fireplace, and they can be also nicely decorated. And okay, this photo was taken, you see, this was after the war, but the house is restored. Just to see, basically, this is important, like to see the ruins, to see the material. It was fully in the upper floor, also stone. It's not adobe. And then we go to Blagaj. In this area, two very important housing structure. It is Kolakovića and Velavićevina house. And this Velavićevina house, I really recommend to visit. And this is first Kolakovića, just because today this is ruined. And but what is important for us to understand that division between two parts, between more private and more public part. This is just basic drawing to understand the principle of the entering to the room. And here we can see basically this construction. So what is important to understand that also this construction floor construction was wooden, and also the ceiling. So, and this dockset construction was just extension of the floor beams. Here is some old drawings from Institute for Preservation of Protection of the Monuments in Bosnia, but old drawings taken from this house to understand this construction, where you have wall, you have these beams. They are just extended about, it's usually up to 1 meter, and then you have just this support. It is very simple construction, and was used broadly inside the Balkan and also inside Anatolia. Then one sequence of the wall construction to see how it was repeating these wooden beams, hatua we call it, in order to strengthen the structure of the houses. And then here this is to see how these pillars, they can be decorated also, and they have this part which is done in stone. And this is the ceiling construction. So under this you have those nice decoration. And as I said, only difference between different houses in using different motif for the decoration of this ceiling structure. And this is Velavićevina house. This is important because this is really huge complex, and it's consisted of 3 parts, A, B, C. What is different? Each time you have, now not to bother you with this each part of the layout, but just what is important here, because it is rich family, they have also this lounge. And this was used as a summer room, because it is, as you can see, on the river done. So you can also, if you go today, they can let you sit there and enjoy it. Really nice, but only, as you can see, what's the difference? If, as you have richer family, they have more these additions inside the complex of the houses, and these are some of the details. Also in this city, you have a famous tekke, and this ceiling was basically from the tekke, but it was used for the religious reason, but it is basically the residential also structure. But since it's not house, I didn't put it in presentation, but I took just this nice ceiling and some other example of the interior design from the Blagaj. This is one sequence from the river. And another city, it is Počtelj, also in Herzegovina. This house was fully destructed, but what was problem with this house? It was used before the war also as a colony, artistic colony, but they were restoring in an appropriate way by using concrete elements. So after the war, it was basically restored in proper way by using wooden beams and so on as much as they could, since it was already lost its many values, but as you can see, more or less they managed to have this original concept of this traditional house. And what is problem basically today, because I have to mention it, it is degradation of these traditional urban areas. Usually you can see some like trial to have something what is so-called traditional, some copy and so on, but really we need this research to know what is background, how these houses were developed. If you want to have some design that will be acceptable for the current moment, but relaying of the something what was before. Or for instance, you can have parking place inside this very valuable historical area, which is basically all historic cities are facing with a similar problem. And to make a short conclusion, that remain and preserve traditional mahallas should be included in the preservation project, and young professionals dealing with the design in those areas or in its surroundings are faced with the challenge to preserve those areas, highlighting its values and contribution to those values by new design. Material technology of the construction was same during the Ottoman period. It means that craftsmanship was traveling around. The knowledge was shared that should be followed even today in order to share experience and best practice example, learning one from each other. Thank you for your attention. So that was